And he asked leaders all over the world to help the United States, to help him, and to send ships and troops. And one world leader did it. Who do you think it was?
Wasn't it a Russian czar?
It was a Russian czar. It was Tsar Nicholas, I think, the first. And he sent ships and troops, and that's the only reason that we are the United States of America today. It was because of one man. And the international bankers paid him back by engineering the Bolshevik Revolution and exterminating the Tsar and his family. They were very, very devout Christians. Do you know why Hiroshima and Nagasaki were bombed with atomic bombs?
I've heard, but I can't recall it right at the moment.
Well, I dug it out, and it's very interesting. Christianity was spreading all over Asia at a wild pace. And the City of London bankers did not want another Christian country to contend with that would unite with other Christian countries already in existence. And the largest Jesuit Catholic cathedral in all of Asia was in Nagasaki. Nagasaki was never on the military list of targets. Colonel Henry Stimson, who was a Wall Street banker, was Secretary of War, and General Leslie Groves walked into the War Department one day, and this is just before the bombs were ready to drop, and he said to General Groves, "Give me that list of targets. I'm going to make the decision. I'm making the decision. No one else is. I will decide where those bombs are dropped." And he took the list away from General Groves, and General Groves was very upset because he hadn't even shown that list to the Chief of Staff yet. So Colonel Stimson selected Hiroshima and Nagasaki because that's where the two largest Christian populations in Japan were living. And the pilot of the bomber carrying the Nagasaki bomb went 4 miles off course to drop that atomic bomb at the location. Ground Zero was very close to the Jesuit cathedral, which I have visited. And I want to tell you, I was walking around it and looking at the broken statues and the collapsed roof, and I looked down and there were blobs of melted glass still lying on the ground around the church. And I reached down and picked one up, and I was looking at it in the sunlight, and suddenly I saw finger bones of a human being who had been vaporized in a moment in that glass. And I dropped it, and I ran from the church. I couldn't stay there. It was so horrific. And in those two museums, in July of 2000, I went to the Peace Museum in Hiroshima and the Peace Museum in Nagasaki, and I made up my mind to work on the radiation issue the rest of my life because of how those museums impacted me, the power of the truth. And so the most important thing for us to do to make a difference is to simply tell the truth. I'm just a messenger. I'm not anything else. I'm just bringing the message of the truth. And I let go of it. I give it to the universe. It comes down like fairy dust, and people are empowered. They find their own solutions. They find their own ways to take action. And believe me, it works. You have to trust people, but they don't know what to do until they have the right information.
Yes.
And so this little radio program of yours is a small lamp in the darkness, but it dispels the darkness.
Well, thank you. A couple things, Leuren. Was Stimson, the Colonel Stimson you're mentioning, wasn't he a member of Skull and Bones?
Oh, absolutely. in fact, what I did was I wanted to know why nuclear weapons testing had been moved to Nevada, which obviously would nuke the whole United States after they nuked all the Marshall Islanders. It had to be a deliberate decision. And also, why did they put nuclear power plants upwind from the big dairy areas and upwind from very densely populated areas? That had to be deliberate. And how in the world could they use a radioactive poison gas weapon, depleted uranium, and knowing it would poison the whole world? That has to be deliberate, too. So what I did was I started Googling the University of California plus Skull and Bones, and guess what? I'm still going down that rabbit hole a year later because Skull and Bones set up the University of California to be their weapons of mass destruction contractor for the Wall Street bankers and the City of London bankers. That is the function of the University of California. The fact that they pump students through every year is just, it's just the fig leaf for what they're really doing. It's a culture of death with direct ties to Skull and Bones. And then I started Googling the key decision-making scientists, Vannevar Bush in World War II, James Conant, who developed depleted uranium in 1943, Edward Teller, Szilard, Franke, all these people, and the real decision-makers were all contractors, either for the Rockefellers or the Rothschilds.
Wow. Well, you know, I do have friends who don't see eye to eye with me and you. I keep them because they're good friends. But I was talking to one of them about the Committee of 300 and, you know, how do you get people to see this? And he said, from his very pragmatic worldview, you know, if you show who makes the money after World War I and who makes the money after World War II and who made the money after, in other words, the follow the money argument is very compelling to people. And if you know, of course, we don't have time to write as many books and write as many articles as we would like to, but this would be, I think, a very fruitful approach to show how the Rothschild and the Rockefeller financial empires have resulted in these, you know, these weapons labs, etc.
But it doesn't impact people personally as much as talking about the public health impact and the environmental impact of these nuclear technologies. And I've gone all over the world and collected vital statistics from governments. I only use government or military data because they can't challenge me. And believe me, even military men are moved by that information. And my deadliest hit on military men, generals and admirals in the audience, you know, they sit there and poo-poo with the birth defects and this and that. So what I do is I flash up Marie Curie's hand that was amputated a year before she died of cancer. They amputated it to try to save her life. And she'd already had 2 fingers amputated, so there were only 3 fingers left on her hand that was covered with cancer. And people keel over backwards in their chairs when I show that image, because I said, this is Marie Curie's hand. It's the hand that won 2 Nobel Prizes, but it cost her her life. And this is only from the dermal contact with uranium and its daughter products. What do you think is happening when you're inhaling it every day, every hour, every moment? And in fact, the entire atmosphere of this planet now is a radioactive poison gas chamber, because 800 tons of depleted uranium is the equivalent of blowing up 83,000 Nagasaki bombs. And they're doing that almost every day in Iraq and Afghanistan. In fact, in July, the U.S. carried out 835 airstrikes, mostly in Afghanistan, some in Iraq. They are now synchronized with the monsoon season, so that the maximum rainout of these tiny particles, nanoparticles of radiation, are rained out over India, the Himalayas. They have their favorite target countries. But guess what? The uranium in drinking water in Los Angeles doubled in 2007. And Los Angeles Power and Light has been measuring uranium in drinking water since 1998. Now, why are they doing that?
Well, do they have a specific source that's doing the contamination, or is it strictly from the air?
It's depleted uranium from Afghanistan and Iraq.
Okay.
It's over here in 2 weeks.
You know, I know you were at the conference that James Fetzer put on last August in Madison on the science and politics of 911. What's controversial?
Yes. Yes, I have
the
DVD of it. It's excellent. It was a great.
I do too, and I've watched it. I've watched it and taken notes from it, and I've posted those notes on my website on 911 and the New World Order.
Good for you.
As well as your notes, etc. But when you talk about Hiroshima and Nagasaki, it reminds me of Dr. Judy Wood's comment that she makes, and she, of course, I think is one of the best authorities, perhaps, and has done the most actual scientific research as to what actually happened at the World Trade Center. And she says 911 was not another Pearl Harbor, as we've been led to believe, but it's more like a new Hiroshima. And she said everything was, vaporized. And,
it was the particle size is the key to what happened at the World Trade Center. And when you demolish a building, when you have a controlled demolition, the rubble pile after the demolition should be 1/3 the height of the original building. So there should have been 35 stories of rubble in the footprint of those two buildings. And yet at that conference, she showed aerial photos, and there was nothing in the footprint. There were big round circles in the dirt with a 16-foot diameter. And do you know what I saw in the summer of 2000 in Livermore when I was a scientist there? I had a student living with me that summer. He came and woke me up at midnight, and he said, come outside, we're doing an experiment. The laser facility's doing an experiment. And so I went out, and there was a 16-foot diameter amber beam pointing straight up into the sky, into the heavens. And he said, all the air traffic has been diverted for 5 miles around this beam. I said, well, what are they doing with that beam? And he said, they're trying to make a star. And I knew it was total crap, because you don't make things with lasers, you destroy them with lasers. And you pump huge amounts of energy into them and blow them apart. And that is the type of weapon that they powdered those two buildings with. And first, they had to blow up the building and destroy the integrity of the buildings. But then they had to get rid of all of that, and they did it with a beam weapon. And there was a military plane flying over those buildings the whole time, and those 16-foot circles, which you can see in the film, are the direct evidence of whatever they used, whatever technology they used to vaporize the buildings. And those buildings absolutely went up in nanoparticles, which are invisible. They do not reflect sunlight, so you can't even see them.
But they ultimately used a number of weapons to accomplish all that.
They had to knock the building down, and so Stephen Jones is the Department of Energy liar on 9/11, and his job is to keep everyone focused on a chemical explosive, thermite, that was used to take that building down. It's not energetic enough. It doesn't release enough energy to turn those buildings into nanoparticles. But he worked for Los Alamos early in his career, and he also sabotaged Fleischmann and Pons and their ability to patent their discovery of cold fusion.